Well, good evening. I'm Mila Tappan from the Finance Authority of Maine, and with me tonight is Michelle Bradley, and we are here to talk about financial aid. We are recording this session, and so please feel free to ask any questions that you have and ask them in the chat. And what we're going to do is we're going to stop periodically and see what questions exist. Michelle will answer them as they come up, but there might be some that we think are helpful for the whole group to hear. So what we're going to do this evening is we're going to talk about financial aid. So this session is intended for people who are thinking about applying for financial aid. We're really thinking specifically about high school juniors and their families, or even students who are a little bit younger. But the high school juniors, the timing of everything is going to reflect what we want you to know about when things will be available and when you might want to take certain steps. So again, please put any questions that you have in the chat tonight. In advance of tonight's session, I did send an email with a link to a couple of different items, including our pay publication. So our pay publication is kind of our premier financial aid publication. And what we have done is this presentation goes along with pay. So if you want to learn more about any of the things we're talking about tonight, on many of the pages it will have down at the bottom of the page where you can find additional information within pay on that particular topic. So for tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about financial aid, the steps to receiving financial aid, the types of financial aid that might be offered, specifically information about financial aid offers that you might receive, what to do if the aid is not enough, and then some additional resources. So financial aid is money that's available to help people pay for college. So it comes in a variety of different forms and it varies by school. But the reality is most students and families now need some sort of financial aid to help pay for some of the cost of college. When we talk about financial aid in general, there are two broad categories of financial aid. So there's something called merit-based aid, and then there's need-based aid. So merit-based aid is the type of aid that schools will offer based on who the student is and what that particular student brings to the table. So for example, the most common type of merit aid is aid that is based on a student's academic performance to date. So a lot of colleges will say, hey, those high school students who have done really well in high school, they really want those students to come to their school, so they'll offer them a scholarship that is likely renewable based on their grades. Other types of merit aid might be athletic money is a type of merit aid. I have a son whose roommate in college was a great trombone player, and that was an important thing at that particular school. And so his department gave him a merit scholarship based on his ability to play the trombone. So the key thing about merit aid is it is based specifically on that student and the attributes that they bring to the table. It's awarded by offices other than the financial aid office. So it's typically offered either by the admissions office or maybe a department within a specific college. This is not going to be our focus tonight, but I do think it's really important that you know about merit aid. And as you start to visit schools and talk to schools, ask them what types of merit aid are available and what students need to do in order to apply for those types of aid. Our focus tonight is going to be on need-based aid. So need-based aid is the type of aid that students are eligible to receive based on their family's financial situation. And this is the money that's awarded by the financial aid office. So believe it or not, a financial aid office is not awarding aid based on a student's GPA. As long as students meet a minimum GPA, that's all that's required. Instead, what they use to determine eligibility for aid is the end result of filing a financial aid application. So one of the financial aid applications that you might already be familiar with because it's been talked about a lot this year is the FAFSA. So the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. And every school out there has to use the FAFSA to determine eligibility for federal financial aid funds. Additionally, here in Maine, we use the FAFSA to determine eligibility for state financial aid funds, and many schools also use the FAFSA to determine eligibility for their own institutional money. If you've heard, for example, about free community college, which is technically free tuition and fees, in order to be considered for that, a student does need to fill out the FAFSA as well. So the FAFSA is that critical form that everyone needs to complete in order to be considered for a whole variety of types of financial aid. Now, we want to be sure that you file that FAFSA even if you don't think you're going to qualify. Here's the reality: you don't know what you'll be eligible to receive unless you apply. And this year they've done a revamp of the FAFSA, worked out most of the bugs. There were a few this year, but one of the things that the revamp of the FAFSA has done is made more people than ever eligible for federal financial aid. So we want to be sure that everyone fills out that FAFSA. It is required for many different types of scholarships. And additionally, even if you're thinking, well, we make enough money that we're probably not going to get any other types of aid, if you're going to have to borrow any money at all, federal student loans are the best types of loans. We'll talk about that a little bit at the very end. And in order to be considered for even federal student loans, the student has to file the FAFSA. So we're going to talk about the timing of when you will file the FAFSA, but please be sure that is on your to-do list for sometime this upcoming fall. Before talking more about the financial aid process itself, I wanted to talk a little bit about what you can be doing now to get ready, because you're not going to file the FAFSA for a little bit. But in the meantime, there's some really important things that you can be doing. So when the time does come to file, you'll feel more comfortable. And one of those things is to start researching college costs and financial aid now. One of the things that the student will do when they complete their FAFSA is they're going to list all of the schools that they're interested in. Now is a great time to start researching schools and building that list of schools. And when we're talking about looking at the different schools that students might be interested in, there's all sorts of things that we want students to be focused on. The academics, the location, how large of a school is going to be a good fit for them. And when looking at schools initially, we really want people to focus on the net price, not the sticker price. So sometimes when you start researching schools, you might hear about a school that's $70,000 a year or something, what feels really outrageous is outrageous. But the reality is very few people pay the sticker price, especially here when we're talking about Maine families. So what we want you to focus on instead is the net price. And what the net price is the cost of the school minus grants and scholarship, minus those funds that don't have to be repaid. That's what you really care about. You don't really care about the sticker price. You care about how much is it actually going to cost you or your student to attend that school. Now, all colleges are required to have what's called a net price calculator. And what this allows you to do is to put in your financial information, and the school is going to use their financial information, what they have available for financial aid, and they're going to give you an estimate of how much that school might cost for the first year. So it is just an estimate, so you don't want to make any decisions based on it. But the net price calculators can start to give you a sense of, okay, this school seems to have really good financial aid. This one over here, maybe not so great. But at the same time, it is just an estimate. It's an average in many ways. So you don't want to make decisions based on it. This year, there is even a little bit more caution that I want people to be aware of when using net price calculators. It's been a busy year for schools with the changes related to the FAFSA, so some net price calculators haven't been updated. So what you want to watch for is you want to, watch for updated information, make sure what year they're talking about, because as long as it's newer, it's going to be more accurate. So it's a good tool just to have in that toolbox as you start to research schools. Another tool that I really like is the College Board's Big Future site. So what this allows students and families to do is to decide what's important to them and to find those schools that meet that criteria. So for example, one of the things that you can do is you can search for schools based on how much need they meet. So all schools award aid in the same way, basically. They say, how much does it cost? How much theoretically can the family contribute? And then what's left is the need. In the perfect world, every school would meet 100% of every student's need. But the reality is not every school does. But there is a way that you can find out the percent of need that an individual school does meet, at least on average, and that's using the College Board's Big Future site. So here's how it looks. It allows you to search for colleges based on a whole variety of types of criteria. In this database, there are over 4,000 schools. So the student might say, you know what, I want to be sure that I search for a school that has my major, maybe a particular location. I think affordability is always important, for example. And then what you can do on the affordability front is you can say, I only want to look at schools that, for example, meet maybe at least 90% of need or 100% of need if that's where you want to start. So what it's going to do is it's going to take all of those 4,000 schools, determine the schools that meet your criteria for affordability, major, location, size, whatever is most important to you, and it's going to winnow that down to a more manageable number of schools to look at a little bit more closely. So we really recommend that you take a look at that. I think you'll find that a great tool and a good place to start when researching schools. Another thing that you want to do is once you've started to build that list of schools, you're going to want to do things like research deadlines and required forms. So a lot of schools have a deadline by which they want the student to fill out the FAFSA. And the reason that they do that is, as I mentioned a moment ago, some schools have really good financial aid. Some schools, it's a little bit more of a struggle. So how they determine how they're going to award their funds is sometimes by having a deadline. And students who meet that deadline are considered for all of the types of financial aid that are available. And those who miss the deadline still get considered for aid, but they basically get whatever is left. So we want to be sure that people know what the deadlines are and are sure that they meet those deadlines. That's one of the best ways to maximize financial aid eligibility. But those deadlines do vary by school. So one of the things to do is for every school on the list to go to the school's website, that's where the best information is, and see what their deadlines look like. Now over here we have a tracking form that comes out of pay. So that is in pay, and so you can use that. It says page 7 here, and as I'm looking at that, I know that's not true. That's not accurate. It's the very end of the booklet. I will fix that. But use this as a way of keeping track of those deadlines. The other thing that you want to be checking on is not only um, what the deadlines are for an individual school, but what financial aid forms are needed. So every school out there is going to require that the student file the FAFSA. The schools have to use the FAFSA to determine eligibility, like I said, for federal aid, state financial aid here in Maine, and most schools use the FAFSA to determine eligibility for their own money as well. However, there are a handful of schools, about 400 across the whole United States, that require an additional form, and that additional form is often something called the CSS profiles. They might have their own, but the CSS profile is a common form if schools are going to have a supplemental form. The CSS profile is more detailed, and schools who have a lot of money sometimes want to know more about a student than you can find out simply based on the FAFSA. The FAFSA has become pretty simple, very simple to be honest with you, and is easy to complete. But the CSS profile is going to go into a little bit more detail and ask some additional questions. The only schools in Maine that use the CSS profile are Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby. So if your student is looking at Maine-based schools, Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby are not on the list, you only need to file the FAFSA. If those schools are on the list, any of those schools, or if students are looking out of state, say in the Boston area, there are a number of schools in the Boston area that do require the CSS profile. So please, again, visit every school's website that you're interested in. Not only check on the deadline, but check to see, are they a FAFSA only school, or do they require the FAFSA and an additional form likely to be the CSS profile if something else is required. Okay, so you want to go ahead and check those out and keep track of that in whatever way works best for you. Also under the Get Ready, we want to be sure that people are saving as much as possible. Now, we recognize how difficult it is to save. Inflation, things are expensive. It's really difficult. But we also hear sometimes that people are hesitant to save, even if they can save a little bit, because they are afraid that saving is going to negatively impact their financial aid eligibility. And we want to reassure you that financial aid is impacted mostly by people's income, not their assets. Assets have very little, if any, impact on financial aid eligibility. So if you are able to save, we want you to know that every little bit does help, even small amounts are going to make a big difference, and that saving is not going to undermine financial aid eligibility. For the vast majority of people, it's going to have no to very little impact at all. If you haven't heard of it, we do administer at FAME a program called NextGen. We administer that on the behalf of the state of Maine. And NextGen is one way to save for higher education, and there are some matching grants available. So I'd love to have you check that out if you haven't before, and you're interested in some of your savings options. And then under Get Ready as well, we want to be sure that people are looking for outside scholarships. Let's just say, for example, that you do the net price calculator. It's a school the student is really interested in, but it doesn't look like that school has great financial aid. One way to make up some of that difference are through outside scholarships, where the student applies for a scholarship, is awarded the scholarship, and then can use that scholarship at a variety of different schools. So we think that searching for scholarships is really important for that reason, as a way of keeping debt down. It's really an important piece to this puzzle of paying for higher education. So we do want people to only use free scholarship searches. All of the legitimate scholarship organizations give away money. They don't want to take your money. So if you see a solicitation to have pay a certain amount in order to find all the best scholarships, that's usually a little bit of a gimmick. So we don't want you doing that, okay? Only use free searches. We'd love to have you start at famemaine.com/scholarships. You'll find that we have a Maine-based scholarship search on that page, as well as links to other reputable organizations where you can do more searching for scholarships. So go ahead and check that out. We'd also love to have you join our Facebook group. We'll touch on this again at the end. Paying for College for Me. One of the things that we do throughout the year is we do provide scholarship information. So when we hear about a great scholarship throughout the year, we'll post those scholarship links with all of you. And it's a smaller group. It's gotten a lot larger, but it's kind of our way of saying, hey, as a bonus for being part of our group, here are some great scholarships that you might not hear about otherwise. So again, more to come on that particular piece. Do we have any questions, Michelle, that we want to address? Thank you. Page 29 is where that, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is where
Yeah, it
that,
doesn't look like we have any questions as of right now, Mila, but yeah, anybody, if they have any, feel free to toss them in the chat. So thanks for pausing.
all right, well, thank you. Okay, so those are great things to be doing over the rest of this semester and over the summer. Another thing that you can do as soon as now, but you definitely have to do at least a week before filing the FAFSA, is to set up the needed federal student aid accounts. So what happens is every single student needs to set up a studentaid.gov account, as do parents. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So students are going to go to studentaid.gov, and when they set up their account, they're going to create what we refer to as an FSA ID, a Federal Student Aid account. It's a username and password that will be used to access the Federal Student Aid website, all aspects of it. It's how they will get into the FAFSA. It's how you sign the FAFSA. If you're going to borrow any federal student loans, it's how you sign a promissory note. Even when students are in repayment, it's how they keep track of their loans even at that point. So this Federal Student Aid account, this FSA ID is what we call it shorthand, is something that all students are going to need. Students can set those up anytime. So if you wanted to get something crossed off your to-do list, you could go ahead now and set up an FSA ID. The key piece, though, is because it is going to be used for years to come, it's really important that you write down the information associated with your FSA ID. Because if you ever do forget your username and your password or things like that, you want to be able to retrieve that. Like any system out there now, there's a way that you can retrieve your username and reset your password, but all of that is going to be a lot easier if you have the critical information written down. So we've created a form, and I sent an email with both the student form and the parent form in the email earlier today that you could use to keep track of. Maybe you take a picture of it, and so it's stored on your phone, or just keep it with where you would keep tax documents. You do want to be sure you keep it in a nice, safe location, but just one way or the other, be sure you keep track of all that information. Now, when you set up an account, you do need to have access, you do need to provide an email address and you need to have access to that email account. For high school students, one of the things we really strongly recommend is you don't want to use your high school email address. And that's because once you're in college, once you graduate from high school and move on, your email address from high school is likely going to be deactivated. So if high school students haven't already, now is a great time to set up an account that can go with them as they move through the various stages in life. So, for example, going ahead and setting up a Gmail account now if they haven't already, and then using that Gmail account to associate with their FSA ID is a great idea. Okay, so that's a really good idea to do that. Now, if you do use your high school email address, you can update that, but it's just so much better to create a Gmail account or something similar and be sure to use that when you are creating your FSA ID. Now, for dependent students, for students who need to put parent information on the FAFSA, which is the vast majority of high school students, then one parent at a minimum will need to have an FSA ID account as well. So as a parent, say for example, parents are married to each other and file a joint tax return, then only one parent needs to have their own FSA ID. They both can, but only one has to. But if it's a situation where parents, for example, are married, but they file separate tax returns, then both parents would need one. So we have those details listed in the parent worksheet. So if you're looking for more information as to exactly who needs an FSA ID, you can look at that for more details. Some parents may already have an FSA ID because the FSA ID is tied to you as an individual. For example, when you create an FSA ID, you actually have to provide your social security number. So you can only have one FSA ID. It's not like your Apple account where I have multiple Apple accounts because I have multiple emails. You can only have one FSA ID because it is tied to your social security number. So as a parent, if you had federal student loans that you've had recently, or if you have an older child who's gone to college and gone through this process, you may already have an FSA ID because once you set it up, that is your FSA ID and you will use that for whatever purpose you need to, whether it's signing a FAFSA or doing anything student loan related for yourself or for any of your children. Okay, we often get some questions on that, on FSA IDs. So I'm going to take a moment and just see if we do have any FSA ID questions or anything else that might have come up in the meantime, Michelle.
Sure. Yeah, we did have one individual ask this question. I was able to answer in the chat, but I think it would be beneficial for you to address it to everyone. So it was asked, so if the parent has gone to college and graduated only a couple of years ago, and we have an FSA account, will this automatically be linked to my child once they sign up for one?
So that's a really great question. So first of all, congratulations on going back to school yourself. And if you have gone back to school since 2015 and you already have an FSA ID, that's great. You have your FSA ID and you don't need to create one. You will use it when your student files their FAFSA. We're going to talk a little bit about the mechanics of this in a moment, but your FSA IDs are actually not linked to each other. So I have an FSA ID, Michelle might have an FSA ID, my oldest son has one, my youngest son has one. They are our own individual FSA IDs. When you file the FAFSA, I'll explain in a moment how everyone's information gets added, but your FSA IDs are actually not linked to each other. They're individual accounts that everyone who's doing anything federal student aid related needs. But if you've already got one, you've got one, and you have already finished a step on the process to having your student apply for financial aid. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
So you are going to be completing, believe it or not, this is crazy to me, the 25-26 FAFSA. So again, if you've got a high school junior or you are a high school junior, the FAFSA you're completing is the 25-26 FAFSA. And the reason that I want to mention that is there's a period of time during which 2 years worth of the FAFSA is available. For example, right now, we still have the FAFSA available for 23-24 and for 24-25. So when next fall rolls around, there'll actually still be two FAFSAs available. So you want to be sure that the 25-26 FAFSA is the one you complete. Just keep in mind that the year of the FAFSA that you're doing is associated with the year that you need the money for. So as a high school junior currently, who's going to be a high school senior in the fall, you're going to start college in the fall of 25. So the 25-26 academic year is when you need financial aid for. So the 25-26 FAFSA is the one that you're going to complete. And again, where you're going to go to do that is the same place where you're going to go to create your FSA ID. You're going to go to studentaid.gov. So the FAFSA is free. You're never going to pay anyone to complete the FAFSA for you. We see scams on this too. If you need help filing your FAFSA, that's one of the things that we're here for at FAME, to help you get that FAFSA done, and all of our support is free. One of the things that's important to know is that the FAFSA does have to be filed every single year. So unlike the admissions process, so let's just say you apply to a variety of schools, you pick the school you're going to go to, you don't have to reapply for admission to that school every year. Once you're in, right? But you do have to reapply for financial aid every single year. So we just want to put that in the back, have you put that in the back of your mind now. But that's one of the reasons why we like to have you sign up for texts or emails. So then in subsequent years, we will send out that text or email to say, hey, don't forget, it's time to file the FAFSA again when your student is in their sophomore, junior, or even senior year if they're going on to grad school. Okay? And so this is just a screenshot of what the FAFSA looks like at the moment. Now, the 25-26 FAFSA will be available sometime in the fall of 24. Normally, the FAFSA comes out on October 1st every year. This past year, because of the revamp, it was delayed. We have heard conflicting messages as to whether it will be available on October 1st this coming year. We hope it will be, but realistically, there may be a little bit of a delay. So hold tight. Again, sign up for texts or emails, and we will keep you in the loop as to when the FAFSA is going to become available. We do recommend getting the FAFSA done, shortly after it becomes available. It's good just to be sure that you've met any deadlines and it's something you can cross off your to-do list. Now, when you file the FAFSA, one of the things that you are going to find is that it's going to require your tax information from 2023. So one of the things that's interesting about the FAFSA is it actually requires tax information from a little bit ago. And the reason that they do that is because for most people, your tax information is going to come directly from the IRS. So you're going to allow that to happen. You have to give permission and say approve to that. But the tax information is going to come over directly from the IRS so that you don't have to enter it manually. So it means it's going to be accurate, and it means it's going to be super easy. And what we find, for example, is that the vast majority of people that I talked to this year as we've gone through this process have been like, really? Was it that simple? I didn't have to put in any income information. And that is intentional. All of the required income information for most people is going to come over directly from the IRS. But it is going to be using 2023 information. We'll talk at the very end about what happens if that information, that tax information, is no longer accurate. Now, when you're filling out the FAFSA, keep in mind that the student is the applicant. So the student is going to have a student section that they are going to complete. How do those things get connected? Because that was a great question a moment ago about FSA IDs getting connected. Like I said, those don't get connected. But within the FAFSA, when your student completes their section, they're going to invite you by listing your name, social security number, date of birth, and that is how you will get an invitation to provide your information on the FAFSA. It can also be done in reverse. So sometimes parents start the FAFSA. They invite their student by providing their identifying information, and then the student gets the invitation. So the FAFSA is one FAFSA, but for dependent students has a student section and has a parent section, and whoever starts it will invite the others. And now that we've seen this in action over the past 5 months, it works really well now. So I think you're going to find the FAFSA, we're seeing people get it done, their student section and the parent section independently, getting them done in like 10 minutes, maybe 15. So it's really become a much, much easier form. So we hope that that will be your experience, and we'll be here to assist with that. Now let's talk a little bit about parent information on the FAFSA and who needs to provide parent information. So as I said, most high school students do need to provide some parent information on the FAFSA. One of the resources that was in that email today was the Get Ready to File checklist. What you're seeing here in this screenshot, not that you can read it, or at least I can't, is some additional information on when parent information is required. So you can refer to that to determine how much longer you're going to have to provide parent information on the FAFSA. Generally speaking, parent information is required until the student is either a graduate student or until they turn 24. But there are also situations where if a student gets married, the student has children of their own prior to that point, that then they'll automatically be considered independent and not have to provide parent information on the FAFSA. Or if we have students who are in foster care or have been any time since they turned 13, or students who are in the legal guardianship of others, or students who are homeless or emancipated minors, there are situations where those students are automatically considered independent and don't need to provide any information on the FAFSA. So those questions are on the back of that handout. A student who can answer yes to any one of those is considered independent. And I wanted to share some of that because probably if you're here with us tonight, your student is going to be considered dependent, but you might have other students in your life, or your student might have friends that have really challenging situations in terms of, their parental relationships, and might think they can't get through the FAFSA. And we want them to know that there is a way, maybe even an easier way for them to get through this process. But assuming that parent information is required on the FAFSA, then we need to think about who are the parents for the purposes of the FAFSA. So if students' parents are married to each other, then both parents will be providing their information on the FAFSA, although only one parent will need to log in with an FSA ID. But what we hear a lot of questions about is what happens when the student's parents are divorced. So if the student's parents are divorced and don't live in the same household, then what you need to be thinking about is which parent provided the most financial support in the 12 months prior to the FAFSA being filed. Whichever parent provided the most financial support, that's the parent who is going to complete the FAFSA. Believe it or not, the information for the other parent is not even required on the FAFSA. So let's say I'm a student, my parents are divorced. Let's say my mother provided 60% of my financial support, my father provided 40% of my financial support. Because my mother provided the majority of my financial support, she's going to be my parent on the FAFSA, and my dad would not have to provide any information, would have nothing to do with the FAFSA. I would have one more question to ask, which would be, is my mom currently married? And if my mom is currently married, then my mom's spouse's information would also have to be provided on the FAFSA. And I know people don't love that answer, but as of the day the FAFSA is filed, if that parent has remarried, the spouse's information is required. Okay. If it's a situation where the parent is not remarried, though, then it's only going to be that parent's information that is required on the FAFSA. So if you have any questions about that, this is one of those areas where we get so many questions. Please let us know. One of the interesting things about that CSS profile, for example, is they do want to know about all of the parents. So that's a big difference between the profile and the FAFSA. But the FAFSA is just going to focus on a more limited number of parents in many situations. And then last but not least, I just want to touch briefly on assets because we talk a lot about what impacts financial aid eligibility. And as I mentioned earlier, income is really the primary driver of financial aid eligibility. And part of that reason is because there are significant assets that are not even going to be asked about on the FAFSA. So when you're completing the FAFSA, for example, you will not list the value of your primary residence. So you don't need to worry about gathering any information on how much your house is worth or anything like that. Your primary residence is completely excluded from the FAFSA. It is not from the profile though. So again, discrepancy or difference between the two different forms. But from the FAFSA, primary residence completely excluded, as are your retirement accounts. So if you're someone who's been saving and putting away for retirement, the value of your retirement funds are also completely excluded from the FAFSA. You don't need to worry about looking those up to fill out the FAFSA. Those are assets that are not asked about at all. So what assets are looked at? It's going to be things like cash, savings, checking accounts, second properties. If if you had a camp or something, they would want to know the net worth of that. And if you've done things like save using a 529 account, which is what that next gen account I referred to is, then you would have to list that as an asset. But the good thing about like a 529 account, a next gen account, is it's listed as a parent asset, not a student asset. And it has much less impact when it's a parent asset. And if you do have a 529 account, we want to be sure that you know that you only list the value of the account for that specific student. Back in the day, I had two kiddos who I was saving for at one point in time. And so the rules were a little bit different then, but if I were doing that now, so if I had some for my oldest son, Alex, and my youngest son, Noah, if I'm doing Alex's FAFSA, I'm only going to list the value of the 529 where he's that beneficiary. Okay. Noah's would not show up on that, just in case you have multiple kiddos. Some people are going to find they don't have to provide any asset information. So for most families earning under $60,000 per year, or families who are receiving any means tested benefits, that means anything from main care to SNAP to TANF, they will not have to provide any assets at all. Okay? So FAFSA, again, much easier than it's ever been. Most people are able to complete their section in 10, maybe 15 minutes. Much easier than it used to be. After the FAFSA gets submitted, the FAFSA goes to federal student aid and it gets processed. And as I mentioned very briefly, students are going to list all of the schools on their FAFSA that they want to receive their information. They can list up to 20. So as they're building those list of schools, when they fill out their FAFSA, they're going to list any school that they even might possibly apply to, even if they haven't applied to that school yet. Then when the FAFSA gets processed, it's going to get sent to each of those schools that they listed on their FAFSA. Students are going to have the ability, once their FAFSA has been submitted and processed, to go in and review all of the information on their FAFSA. Guess where? At studentaid.gov. And if a mistake was made, they can make a correction. So that's one of the things I want you to know to set your mind at ease. If you do make a mistake, mistakes are fixable. So we obviously want people to be careful going through this process, but at the same time, know that you can correct an error. If a student decides to add an additional school after they've done their FAFSA, you can go back into the FAFSA and you can add that additional school. So the FAFSA submission summary is an important document that you'll want to review, make sure everything looks okay. And it's also something that you might find that some scholarship organizations will ask about. So here in Maine, we have this amazing scholarship foundation called the Worthington Scholarship Foundation. And they are awarding a tremendous number of scholarships to students. One of the things that you have to provide as part of your application for a Worthington Scholarship, they're available at every high school in Maine, is a copy of this FAFSA submission summary. So if down the road, I know, it's a little bit down the road right now, but down the road, if you're going to be in a situation where you're applying for scholarships, they may ask for something called a FAFSA submission summary. And here's where you'll find it at studentaid.gov. And again, what it is just the summary of all of the information on your FAFSA. I almost took this out. There is a process when students fill out the FAFSA where sometimes students are randomly selected to have their information verified by the college. This year, virtually no one was selected because everything happened kind of late, but I left it in because I do think there is the possibility that next year some FAFSAs will be selected for verification. All I want you to know related to verification is that if you're selected, don't worry about it. It's not like an IRS audit, it's a random selection. And it's just going to require that you provide maybe some additional information to the school. What they're trying to do is to make sure that the information was all accurate. Vast majority of you will never be selected, but if you are, don't worry about it. Just know that you do need to follow up, though. And one of the tricky pieces, and we're going to talk about this when it comes to financial aid offers as well, is that many schools communicate via email and with the student only. So, one of the big transitions for parents as their students start applying to college, whether it's through the admissions process or the financial aid process, is the schools only deal with the students. There's a few exceptions to that, but all of the correspondence, for example, is going to come in the name of the student. Back in the day, when that comes in a that used to come always, and now only sometimes came in form of a paper letter, and it came in the mailbox, it was on the counter, even if it was addressed to my kiddo, at least I knew something had come that we need to follow up on. Now what happens is a lot of those requests go directly to the student's email account for that particular school. So it's really important that students know that they've got to set up their email accounts actually first. They've got to set them up with the school after they've been admitted, and then they need to check them regularly. So again, we're a bit down the road from all of this happening, but it's just something I would like to have you tuck away, that you and your student have that conversation about the importance of setting up accounts and checking accounts regularly. When your student gets their financial aid offer, it will potentially have a variety of types of aid on it, hopefully lots of different types of aid. And what we're hoping for in particular are lots of scholarships and grants. Scholarships and the grants are the best types of financial aid. Those are the funds that don't have to be repaid. The federal government has the federal Pell Grant. That's the largest of all the federal grant programs. Here in Maine, we have the Maine State Grant. We have traditionally have had a deadline for that. That deadline is May 1st, but that's May 1st of senior year. So don't worry, you haven't missed a deadline. That wouldn't be for this year's juniors until next May. And then the schools themselves have, a variety of grant and scholarship programs, as well as money from outside sources exists as well. Usually scholarships are merit-based, and usually grants are need-based. That's not 100%, but in all other ways, they are the same in that they are funds that don't have to be repaid, and you're hoping for as many of those types of funds as possible. Your student might also be offered, or you, if you're the student, might be offered work study. So work study is a great program. I'm a big fan of work study. It's a program where a student is going to be offered a lump sum of money. And what the student will then do is they will find a job on campus, and there's people that can help them do that. There's some jobs sometimes off campus, but they're primarily on campus jobs. And the student will work at that job and get a paycheck typically every other week. So you're probably thinking, well, how come that's considered financial aid? Well, the reason that it's considered financial aid is that the federal government gives the schools a pot of money that they can award to students in the form of work study funds. The benefit to the student is that those work study funds are going to mean it's going to be a lot easier to find a job on campus because the employer only has to pay a portion of their wages. So they're going to find it much easier to get a job. And one of the benefits of work study as well is that those jobs know that the student is a student first. So with work study, I remember when I worked at Orono, we had work study students. We knew finals week, they were going to need to cut back their hours. We knew if they had a big exam or a paper, they might need to be working less. Again, they were students first. They might come work for a couple hours, go to class for a couple hours, come back and work for a couple hours. So there's just a lot of benefits, not to mention the relationships that they would often develop with people on campus. I worked for a professor that was, instrumental in me getting my first job out of college. So work study is great. But here's the deal that I want you to know with work study is that work study funds are not available until the student gets to school and starts earning those funds based on how many hours they're working and their rate of pay. So work study funding is not helpful in paying that first fall bill. And some schools make that really clear on their financial aid offers. Some schools are not as obvious about that. So every summer we'll get people who will call because they think the work study is going to show up on the bill and pay down the balance. And that's not how it works. So it's great for things like incidentals, things like gas money to come home, laundry money. If people are really good with saving their money, maybe the books for spring, but it does not help that first semester bill get paid. So just knowing that now, I think is helpful. And then, very briefly, I just want to mention student loans. There's a lot of conversation about student loans these days. What you're going to see is that the vast majority of students at virtually every school are going to be offered a federal student loan. And a federal student loan comes in the form of both subsidized and unsubsidized. Many students have a mix of both, but the maximum that a student can borrow in a federal student loan their first year is $5,500. It goes up to 6,500 their second year, and then 7,500 their last 2 years. Federal student loans are very different than any other loans out there. Students can get these loans all on their own because they are a matriculated college student who did a FAFSA. Those are the requirements. So these are not credit-based loans. These are not loans that have to be co-signed by anyone. Students can get these loans all by themselves. But again, they are limited. So when students are thinking about borrowing, if they need to borrow, we do recommend federal student loans first because typically the interest rates are a little bit lower, higher than maybe they should be, but they tend to be a little bit lower. But where federal student loans are very different from other types of loans, in addition to the fact that there's no credit history required, is that when students go into repayment, there's a lot more flexibility. So, for example, they can do standard repayment plans where they pay them back within 10 years, or they can do income-based repayment plans where maybe their payments are a little bit lower when they start working until they're earning a little bit more money. There's even some situations under which loans can be forgiven over a period of time, depending on the work that a student is doing and who they're employed by, for example. So there's a lot more information about student loans that we'd love to share at some point. You can check out our website. Well, I'm going to share at the end how you can do individual appointments with us. But before borrowing any money, it's a good idea to understand how the loans are very different from each other. Federal student loans are the only loans that students can get all on their own. Any other of the private loans that you might hear about are going to require a cosigner. So when researching schools, we want to be sure that we're finding those schools that have good financial aid so that borrowing can be limited. When the student does eventually, again, we're almost a year down the road here, but when they do get their financial aid offer, they will see what types of aid they are offered. Schools will typically not send financial aid offers until students are offered admission. So these two things, you can apply for financial aid and apply for admission at the same time, but at the end of the day, you need to have done both before you're going to get a financial aid offer. We don't know for sure when schools will start sending financial aid offers. This year was really, really late. We're hoping next year that maybe sometime in January they'll start sending financial aid offers. But again, I just really want to stress the importance of students checking their email, because what a lot of schools will do is send an email to a student to say, we have your financial aid offer ready. Go check out your student portal, which is the online site where schools host all sorts of information like the financial aid, the bill, registration information, grades, all of that lives in an online portal at most schools. And so that's where the most up-to-date information is going to be sent. But again, often it's going to be your student only who is going to get an email. So that communication between the two of you will be critical. And then when you do get your financial aid offers, you're going to find that they all look a little bit different. So different schools have their financial aid offers set up differently. Some are great and are very clear cut. They tell you what it costs. They divide the different types of aid into different categories, free money, grants and scholarships, work study, loans. And they might even tell you what the remaining balance is going to be after, that aid is applied. Others kind of lump things together. We see some financial aid offers where they don't even list the cost. So it makes comparing financial aid offers a little bit difficult. So what we developed several years ago was this form. And what you can do is you can use this form and get that apples to apples comparison. So for each school, you're going to list the costs. We like to focus on those direct costs, tuition fees, room and board or housing expenses of the students living on campus. Subtract out the grants and scholarships. That gets us that net price, right? That gets us what we really care about. The cost minus the grant funds or scholarship funds that don't have to be repaid. And then we can build in the loans and the other things as need be. But that net cost, that you will get that if you do that for school A, school B, school C, you will get that apples to apples comparison. Because here's the thing, sometimes more expensive schools are actually more affordable. It all comes down to which schools have how much financial aid and how much they offer you. So this form can help you get to that. There are many other ways in which you can do that. There are apps for that. You can use a pen and paper or a pencil and paper. You can do an Excel spreadsheet. But what we want to be sure is that before people commit to a school, ideally everyone walks through a form kind of like this to figure out their costs and compare one school to another. And I'm not saying that you select always the least expensive school. One of the things that's most critical is we need students to go to a school where they can be successful and actually graduate from. But there's no doubt that I think for the vast majority of families that we work with, and I know was the case for us, cost is a significant factor that needs to be taken into account. We are almost done, my friends. So we talked a little bit at the beginning about the fact that it's going to be 2023 income that's going to be required on the FAFSA for 25-26. You may find that your situation changes. If your financial situation improves, hey, that's great. No problem at all. You don't have to go back and update your income information. But if your income was to decrease, let's just say that someone changed jobs or lost a job and their income decreased, you can go to the school and let them know that. So you wouldn't adjust the FAFSA. The FAFSA is going to start by using 2023 income, and that's going to be the case. But a school can make a decision to use your actual income or more updated income information to reflect where things stand with you. And they will take care of updating your FAFSA if that's the case. Let's just say if there's a divorce or separation. So, maybe after the FAFSA was filed, that happens. And so they really only want to be using one parent's income. So you'd want to reach out to the school and let them know that. The FAFSA is really simple. So you're going to find it doesn't ask about a lot of your other things going on in your life. Maybe you have really high medical bills. The FAFSA doesn't ask about that, but a college can take that into account. So if you have high expenses that are not discretionary, you want to let the school know about that. If you have multiple kids in college at the same time, you're going to want to reach out to both colleges and let them know that you have multiple kids in school. So these are all things that you would want to follow up with when you're talking to a financial aid office. And I really, really encourage you to do so. Most financial aid offices have all these computer systems that take care of pulling in the information and calculating financial aid offers. Where financial aid people spend their time is working with families to understand your circumstances, make adjustments as necessary, and work with you to figure out how to make paying for higher education affordable at that school. So please, please, please do reach out to them. Now, what if the aid isn't enough? So, you get your financial aid offer, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm a little bit short here. One of the things that we're big fans of at FAME is the piecemeal approach to paying for higher education. So we've already talked about a few of those pieces early on. The student having grades that might result in them getting some merit aid or having special talents that gets them some merit aid. Making sure that savings has happened, searching for those scholarships. Those are all things that can fill in, some of that outstanding balance. And the idea is to have as many pieces as possible because then no one piece needs to be as large. So again, doing the merit money, savings, both on the student side and the parent side, scholarships those are all important things. Also, considering a tuition payment plan. So many schools, the vast majority of schools have a way where you can decide if there's a portion of the bill that you want to make monthly payments on. So when my kiddos were in school, one of the things that I used to do is sit down with that bill and say, okay, can I do anything out of my regular monthly budget? And if I could, then I could, work with the school to enroll in that plan. And just like I did when my kids had braces, I would just make those monthly payments over a period of time. What's nice about tuition payment plans is they are not loans, so you are not being charged interest on these. There's usually a small enrollment fee, but just by virtue of being able to spread it out over a series of months, sometimes can make paying for college or higher education a little bit more affordable. So again, most people can't afford to do this as the primary way to pay for the bill, but as part of a piecemeal approach, having some of that paid through a tuition payment plan can work really well. And then, of course, there are financing options, whether it be direct student loans. Sometimes families need to go beyond that, but we just really want people to be cautious about that. And then I just also wanted to mention that there are tax credits and deductions. So when you go to file your taxes, you may find that if you paid for some schooling out of pocket, that the next time you file your taxes, you might get some additional tax money back, or in essence, you're paying less in taxes. If I didn't do this every time, but some years when I was on top of it, which was not every year, I would say, okay, we paid this much less in taxes because of these federal tax credits due to education. I would take that money, set it aside, and that's one of the ways I would take it. I would take that and pay for the next fall's part of the next fall's tuition bill. So that's just a different strategy that might work for some people. So hopefully all of these pieces coming together to make paying for higher ed a little bit easier. We have pay, as I've mentioned. Some of the pages I think were off, and I apologize for that, but you can look at the PDF of that, or you can go to famemaine.com/publications, and you can order any of our publications, and we will send them to you. But you're going to see here that we do have junior and senior year checklists. I know I'm a big checklist person. I think, Michelle, you are too. A lot of us, find it's a lot easier to stay on track when, a lot's going on if we have a checklist. So we put this together, and we hope that this will help you kind of know what to expect and the timing of all of the different things as you continue through junior year and then move into senior year. We have other publications as well, so we'd love to have you check those out. These all live on our website. We also have videos, we have tools and calculators. We offer help once the FAFSA becomes available, so you can look for different ways in which we can offer that help. We have that scholarship search that I mentioned. And then one of the most important things to us at FAME is financial wellness, regardless of how much money a student's going to earn or their parents earn. We need to be sure that people feel comfortable with money and know how to, make informed decisions around money. So that is kind of a thread that goes through everything that we have. So we have a whole section on our website dedicated to financial wellness. And then just to wrap up tonight, as I mentioned earlier, we'd love to have you sign up for texts and emails from us. If you want to sign up for texts, you can actually just opt in by texting the number that you see here. You can also go to join to famemaine.com/join. And if you go there, you can sign up again for emails, or you can opt into texting, and the telephone number is listed there as well. We will not inundate you with texts and emails. We will only send them periodically, and we'll really try to stick to important, critical, timely information. And of course, you can opt out at any point in time. We would love to have you join our Facebook group. This year, with all of the changes to the FAFSA, having our Facebook group was, I think, really helpful to parents, because as we learn new stuff, we could share that in the Facebook group. So that literally became the place that had the most up-to-date information for the families in Maine. It is just for parents and caregivers, so it's a safe space where you can talk about some of the challenges that are associated maybe with paying for higher education. And last but not least, we do have free financial aid coaching. So you can schedule a one-on-one appointment with us. It's a Zoom appointment. And we will talk with you about whatever you want to talk about. We can help you file the FAFSA, but earlier on, we can talk about strategies for paying for higher education, maybe even when you're a little bit out from that. We can go over financial aid offers with you. We even work with students who have already gone to college and are now repaying their student loans. So whatever you need to talk about, that is what we're here for. So with all that said, I was watching. I don't think any additional questions came in the meantime. But if you do have questions, please let us know and put them in the chat. I'll take just a second and hold tight, take another drink of water, and give you a chance to put in a question if you have one. All right. Well, with that then, I want you to know that we are so glad that you joined us tonight at 7 o'clock on the dot, so we can go watch the Bruins momentarily. But we are here for you now, and we will be here with you all the way through senior year and thereafter. So thank you so much for joining us, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions that you have. So take care, have a great night, and we'll send you the link to this recording tomorrow.